Hi, this is A.J.B. I am a licensed mental health counselor, and in this video, we're going to cover the topic of nostalgia. Specifically, I'm interested in finding out whether it's healthy and whether there's any kind of clinical significance to it, meaning that, well, one, I want to know whether when people become more nostalgic, are they helping themselves or hurting themselves, and whether when people do become more nostalgic, whether that's a sign that something is not right. Okay, so that's what I mean by clinical significance. And so let's just jump into it. My entire presentation here is going to be based on a paper written by a handful of individuals that I've tried to pronounce their names and I butchered it, so I'm not even going to try. But it's on your screen right now. So if you ever want to read the actual source material yourself, you can find it more easily. So you just pause the video and look it up yourself. All right. So let's jump into it. Let's start with the basics. What is nostalgia? The dictionary definition is a pretty good one. It just says a sentimental longing or wistful affection for the past. Right? I think that makes sense. Makes sense for me. I assume that it makes sense for you as well. But we can go a little deeper than that. So researchers have analyzed what nostalgia meant for others. Right? So they just got a bunch of people together and they asked them, hey, what was the last time you felt nostalgic? And can you write like a description, like 1,000 to 1,500 word description of that nostalgic moment? And they did that, and they extracted themes. And the number one theme that came out is that it seems that apparently it's overwhelming, that overwhelmingly people were nostalgic for other people. It was about times that involved social situations, kind of things, right? Social things. So that's one thing that's interesting. The second most common theme was for momentous life events. The researchers also found that another theme in these narrative stories is that they are often redemptive in nature. What that means is that their stories will start perhaps negative, but eventually turn out positive. Or it's stories of them overcoming something. Also, they found that the nostalgic stories are more often positive than negative. They will have more words that indicate positivity than negativity, right? And lastly, the self is always central to all of these nostalgic recollections. So that part really makes sense, I figure, because, well, when was the last time that you were nostalgic for somebody else's life story, right? It just makes no sense. It's almost like part of the definition of nostalgia, right? It's gonna be about us, right? So let's go to the next thing. How common is nostalgia? It's super common. So in one study that was done on undergraduate students, they found that 79% of those students would report experiencing nostalgia at least once a week. So that's 4 out of 5 people. 4 out of 5 people will say that they experience nostalgia at least once a week. About 17%, so let's just say like 1/5, let's round it up. About 1/5 will say that they experience it 1 to 2 times a month. I think that is for me. I think that's how often I would say I experience nostalgia. And 4% would say that they experience less than 1 time a month. So it's actually rare for people to experience it rarely, right? It's a very common experience. So what the researchers took away from this is that this experience is not unique to vulnerable individuals, meaning it's not unique to people who are suffering psychologically, right? So that begins to answer one of our questions. It's not a unique experience. It might not be a sign that something is wrong with an individual, but it also could be. And we'll flesh that out in a second. It probably is more common in individuals who are going through something, and you'll see that in a second. So now let's take a look at what triggers nostalgia. Researchers, in order to answer this question, they figured that the best place to start is to do a self-report study. That just means that researchers asked people, hey, the last time you felt nostalgic, what do you think caused it? Right? And what they found out was negative moods. Across the board, negative moods seem to contribute to nostalgia the most. But now I'm going to ask you to be a little bit of an investigator. Do you remember how I said that the number one theme in these nostalgic stories was other people? Out of all the negative moods, what do you think will be the negative, specifically, what will be the negative mood that people will mention the most? It was, they're nostalgic most often for people. Loneliness. Loneliness is the most frequently reported negative mood that triggered nostalgia. So the next thing that researchers wanted to do is they wanted to figure out, well, is this kind of a coincidence or is there like a causal relationship here? And they did experiments. That's how we find out causality, by doing experiments. And so they induced sadness and they found out that increased nostalgia. Yeah, inducing sadness actually increases nostalgia. Then they induced loneliness. They made their participants lonely, and that also increased nostalgia. And finally, they induced meaninglessness, and that again increased nostalgia. So we are now having a causal relationship. It looks like sadness, loneliness, and meaninglessness trigger nostalgia. Also, they found that death awareness triggers nostalgia or increases nostalgia in individuals who report having a high trait, who are high trait nostalgics. So the concept of high trait nostalgia is a little funny one, a little bit of funny concept. So I'm not entirely sold on it. So I didn't talk about it so much. But there is such a thing. I guess some researchers use a concept such as high trait or trait nostalgia. Trait nostalgia, by the way, or trait anything, just refers to the propensity, the propensity to feel something. So trait anxiety refers to the likelihood that you might get anxious. So high trait anxiety would mean that you are highly likely to be anxious. So high trait nostalgia means that you are highly likely to be nostalgic. So death awareness apparently increases nostalgia only individuals who are high trait nostalgics. I don't like the concept of high trait nostalgia because I think it confounds itself with other things that might be going on with people. Not that important. But anyways, I think what you might find interesting is how they induce sadness or loneliness or meaninglessness. How do they make people sad? Well, that's actually not that crazy. The way they induce sadness in the experimental condition is by just making people read sad stories. As far as loneliness, that one's a little funny. So the way they induce loneliness is by convincing people that they are lonely. And the way they did that is through authority, right? So the power of authority. So if a doctor does a blood test on you, right, and comes back and tells you, hey, you have a disease, you're going to believe him probably, right? They did the same thing here, except here a psychologist came in and, gave you imagine a psychologist comes in and gives you a lab coat, is wearing a lab coat, looks super official, gives you some kind of a piece of paper and with a bunch of questions on it that sound very serious and asks you to answer them. And then says to you, okay, thank you for doing it. Let me now assess your personality or whatever. And comes back to you and tells you, based on our analysis, looks like you are lonely. That's going to make a person start wondering like, wait a minute, how am I lonely? Maybe I am lonely, right? And you're going to start questioning yourself. And if you think about loneliness enough, it's going to make you start feeling lonely, right? As far as meaninglessness, the way they induce that is similar to how they induce sadness. They had them read a philosophical write-up on how if we compare ourselves to the entire size of the universe, we're kind of like just specks of dust, or not even, right? More like an atom on Earth, as we are to the universe as an atom is to us, right? We were just so small and essentially insignificant, right? So that's what they would read, and yeah, if you read that kind of philosophy, it's gonna feel crappy, and life will seem more meaningless. So that's how they did that. As far as the death awareness thing, I don't remember how they did that. So let's take a look at the benefits of nostalgia. So, they're kind of like going the other way around now. Before they induced a negative emotion and they wanted to see if that increases nostalgia. Now they're going to induce nostalgia and see if that increases the inverse of that negative emotion, right? So if it's going to make people feel better, basically, that's what they're trying to see. The way they induce nostalgia is very simple. They just ask people to think about something that they were nostalgic. I think they also made them write about it, like 1,000 words or something. Anywho, let's see what the results were. Okay, it turns out that inducing nostalgia increases positive affect. It also increases positive self-regard. So positive affect is just you feel good, you're happier. Positive self-regard, that means that you feel good about yourself. It increases sense of social connectedness. So remember, the number one reason is loneliness, right? So and most frequent nostalgic memories are about other people. So it would make sense that it would increase a sense of social connectedness. Also increases a sense of interpersonal competence, so people feel more competent interpersonally. And I think the significance of that here is that nostalgia, I think, well, it's not in the definition. Well, no, actually, it wasn't a definition. It's a positive recollection. It's not a recollection of like cringe moments in your life. So because you're not recalling cringe moments in your life, you're recalling moments that were great and fun, and they are likely to be interpersonal in nature. You're probably gonna feel more competent interpersonally as a result of doing like this mental time travel. And also it increases a sense of meaning in life. So, the number two reason is momentous life events. Those were the second most common themes, right? So that could contribute to somebody's a sense of meaning and purpose in life. Those might be moments where their life felt really meaningful. But also belonging can create meaning. So just feeling like they're belonging can also contribute to a sense of like my life is worthwhile and full and meaningful. So what were the researchers' conclusions? Well, their first conclusion is that nostalgia is not pathological, but adaptive and healthy. They also theorized that nostalgia induction, or making people feel nostalgic, might be useful clinically, so for like self-help or therapy. My conclusions, generally, yes, I agree with those sentiments. Usually nostalgia is not pathological and may be helpful, but this is where I deviate a little bit. I say usually, because it could be, and we'll get into that in a second. And nostalgia induction may be useful in therapy or self-help, but, so let's get into that but. Oh, my slides are broken. Okay. So nostalgia is still living in the past. And from a clinical perspective, that may be problematic. That can keep, many therapists will probably be able to relate to this, that some individuals that come for therapy, usually they are depressed, they sometimes can live in the past, like too much in the past, and that can keep them stuck, right? They don't have a forward focus. They don't have a forward, sometimes because they feel so hopeless about their future, they don't even bother planning for the future or thinking about the future. And so just living through the past can keep a person stuck. And let me give you one stereotypical, caricature. Let me give you one caricature of an example. I think a lot of people will be able to relate to this. Think of this. The coping elderly veteran who's constantly talking about past glories. Maybe you run into someone like that at a bar. Maybe you run into them at a bus stop. I definitely have. Versus the grandfather, another elderly man, who won't shut up about his grandchildren. Out of these two, which one do you think is healthier? Most likely the one who keeps talking about his grandchildren. The veteran he's coping. He's doing what these researchers are suggesting nostalgia does, which is it's a coping mechanism, right? So the veteran is coping with a lack of meaning that's present in his life today. Meanwhile, the grandfather, he has meaning. He's talking about his meaning, his grandchildren, right? He's investing himself in the next generation. So what are my recommendations as far as nostalgia? Indulge in it if it helps, but don't make it your home, right? So you don't want to be stuck. You don't want to get stuck. You want to use it as motivation. Oh, and there are studies that show that statistically, that is in fact what happens. When people become more nostalgic, they tend to become more forward focused. Nostalgia tends to motivate people, right? So Basically, what I'm saying is nostalgia is not dangerous. If you're nostalgic, go for it, indulge in it, but be cautious. Be on a lookout that you're not keeping yourself stuck. Be on the lookout that you are motivating yourself, that you are making forward movements to correct your situation. So that's my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. Hit the like button, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one, whenever the next one comes out. Bye.